The war was ending, but for thousands of German soldiers, their journey was far from over. Across an ocean, in the quiet heart of Texas, freight trains screeched to a stop under a burning sky. Inside them, men who had once fought for Hitler's empire, now prisoners of the United States. They expected hatred, vengeance, perhaps even execution. What they found instead was kindness, and something even stranger. When the gates of Camp Bowie swung open, they saw them, two enormous black and tan figures moving beside American soldiers, Rottweilers, German dogs, guarding German men under American command. In that surreal moment, a question settled over the camp like dust. What happens when the symbols of your own power no longer belong to you? Because sometimes the harshest lesson of war isn't defeat, it's seeing mercy wear your uniform. If stories like this make you stop and think, if you love exploring the hidden human side of history, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and lets us keep uncovering the moments that textbooks forget. And hey, share it with someone who loves a good twist of fate in history. The war was collapsing. Across battlefields once ruled by German banners, surrender spread like wildfire. Soldiers who had marched through Paris now stumbled through rubble, their uniforms torn, their pride reduced to dust and disbelief. Freight trains rattled across Europe, packed with weary men. But their final destination wasn't Berlin or Vienna. It was the unknown. They whispered of captivity, of vengeance waiting beyond the ocean, and wondered which was worse, defeat or what followed. When the ships left Europe, the sea felt endless. The men stood on deck, faces gray with exhaustion, eyes fixed on a horizon that never moved. America, enemy, myth, mystery, waited beyond the mist. The voyage was quiet. No one sang. Even the guards spoke little. They offered cigarettes, food, sometimes a hesitant smile. The Germans didn't understand it. They had been trained to expect hatred, not courtesy. Weeks later, land appeared, a faint line of blue and gold beneath the rising sun. Texas. The name itself sounded foreign, almost fictional, like something from a soldier's dream of cowboys and deserts. Trains waited on the docks, boxcars clattering open. The men were loaded inside, too tired to protest. Through narrow slats, they glimpsed an unfamiliar land, wide skies, dry heat, fields stretching forever. The air smelled of dust and mesquite, sharp and alive. Every mile carried them deeper inland, farther from everything they knew. Some stared silently out the cracks, others prayed, others just slept. They expected cruelty upon arrival, screaming guards, barking dogs, punishment for every mistake. After all, that was what their own regime had taught them to expect from victors. Revenge was the law of war. Instead, when the train doors slid open, they were greeted by sunlight and silence. No jeering crowds, no rifles raised, just American soldiers in khaki, calm, professional, almost bored. A sergeant, barely older than 20, called out in hesitant German, "Welcome, fellows. Food and showers soon." The prisoners froze, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or brace for the punchline that never came. Rows of wooden barracks stretched before them, white and neat, each window trimmed in army green. Barbed wire glinted in the light, but beyond it was order, not menace. They were given bowls of beef stew, slices of bread, and hot coffee. Steam rose in the warm Texas air. No one trusted it at first. But hunger overruled suspicion, and soon spoons clinked softly. Inside, disbelief lingered. Could this be the enemy? The same nation that bombed Dresden now serving them dinner? Kindness felt like a trick, a weapon sharper than steel. Yet every rule, every gesture proved consistent. The Americans kept schedules, offered medical checks, even dental care. The phrase, "You are soldiers, not criminals," echoed through the interpreter's calm voice. That sentence unsettled them more than any guard tower. Soldiers, not criminals. It implied dignity. It suggested the war might have ended somewhere before this fence. If not in the world, then perhaps in spirit. Night fell over Camp Bowie like a curtain of warmth. Electric lights glowed in perfect rows. The men lay in bunks too clean to feel real, listening to the hum of generators instead of guns. Some whispered that the Americans were trying to shame them through mercy. Others thought this was a deception before punishment began. But deep down, many felt something else. Uneasy gratitude. As the cicadas droned outside and the Texas wind carried the scent of mesquite through the barracks, one man, Lieutenant Becker, stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe defeat has lessons we've yet to understand. Morning in Camp Bowie began with the shrill call of a bugle cutting through the dry Texas air. The sun rose fast, lighting the white barracks like bone under a merciless sky. German prisoners shuffled into lines, boots crunching against red dust. They expected orders barked with contempt, but instead the guards spoke plainly, businesslike. No shouting, no swagger, just quiet efficiency. Breakfast was simple, eggs, bread, and black coffee, but it felt strange to eat without fear. Men looked at one another, wondering when the cruelty would start, because surely this civility couldn't last. Days unfolded with clockwork precision. Roll call, work assignments, lunch, rest. There was no chaos, no random punishments. For soldiers raised on terror, discipline without fear was almost unrecognizable. Becker noticed everything. The guards' casual posture, their clean uniforms, the way they joked softly among themselves. They carried authority not through menace, but through calm confidence. It was disarming. In the afternoons, the prisoners worked. Some repaired fences, others cleared brush or helped farmers nearby. The Americans paid them in coupons redeemable for small luxuries: tobacco, chocolate, even books. At first, the men laughed bitterly. Work for the enemy? But as days passed, the rhythm dulled their resistance. Labor became routine, and in the evenings they almost felt human again. The camp itself ran like a small town. Electric lights buzzed at dusk. A library opened with donated books. Translators organized lessons, English, history, even art. Civilization inside barbed wire felt surreal. Letters from home were allowed, censored but cherished. Becker's first was from his mother, still alive in Munich. Her words trembled across the page, a lifeline from a world collapsing. At night, the prisoners gathered quietly outside, watching the horizon fade into fire and dust. Beyond the fences, coyotes howled, and in the distance, something heavier breathed in the dark. "Dogs," someone whispered. The rumor spread. The Americans had guard dogs, huge ones. Men claimed to have heard growls too deep to belong to strays. The thought lingered like smoke. Becker dismissed it at first. He'd trained dogs before, near the Danube, proud of their discipline and strength. Yet something about this unseen presence unsettled him more than any rifle. The guards never mentioned them. No warnings, no demonstrations of threat. Just that steady silence beyond the wire at night, broken occasionally by a soft, deliberate patting of paws. Meanwhile, the Americans treated even the smallest rule as sacred. Orders were followed, not forced. Becker couldn't help but notice the difference. Discipline here didn't come from fear. It came from choice. Some prisoners began to question old truths. If the enemy could show fairness, what did that make of their own ideals? For the first time, doubt crept through ranks once carved in certainty. Still, pride lingered. During rest breaks, men muttered about the humiliation of being pitied. "They're mocking us," one said. "They feed us to feel superior." Yet deep down, the comfort stung less each day. By week's end, Becker began keeping a small notebook. He wrote not of war, but of details. The scent of coffee, the sound of laughter, the strange peace that made him uneasy. And every night, as the camp fell quiet, that sound returned, A low, steady growl from beyond the wire. Not wild, not threatening, just watchful, as if waiting for something neither side yet understood. The first few weeks inside Camp Bowie had become routine. Work, eat, rest. The strange calm of captivity dulled the prisoners' nerves, until one night, when something in the darkness stirred. It began with a low sound, faint but deliberate, rolling through the still Texas air like thunder muffled under earth. Men froze mid-breath, eyes darting toward the barracks walls. Someone whispered, "Hund!" The word rippled through the bunks. Dog. Yet this wasn't a random bark or a stray's whine. It was heavier, measured, like a heartbeat wrapped in muscle and instinct. Silence followed. Then another growl. Becker sat upright, pulse quickening. He strained to listen. Beyond the fence, past the watchtowers, the noise came again. Closer this time, steady as footsteps. It wasn't imagination. Something was out there. By morning, the rumor spread like wildfire. The Americans had unleashed dogs around the perimeter, huge ones trained to tear escapees apart. Each man claimed he'd heard claws scraping, breath steaming in the night. At roll call, eyes scanned the fences for movement. Nothing. Just endless wire, pale dust, and soldiers sipping coffee, indifferent to the tension crawling under every German skin. "They're hiding them," one prisoner muttered. "Waiting to release them at night?" Another swore he'd seen eyes glowing behind the brush. Fear, once dormant, began to whisper again. Becker didn't believe in ghost stories, but unease crept under his skin. He'd trained shepherds during the war. He knew that kind of growl, the sound of restraint, not rage. Days passed, but the question lingered. Why use dogs here when the prisoners were already compliant? It didn't make sense, unless the Americans were making a point without saying a word. One evening, while repairing fences, Becker paused, squinting toward the horizon. The air shimmered with heat. Then he heard it, a faint chain jingle, a soft snort followed by silence. His partner, a farmer from Bavaria, dropped his pliers. "Did you hear that?" Becker nodded slowly. It wasn't imagination this time. The sound was too deliberate, too confident. Something or someone was patrolling. That night, as dusk bled into violet, the camp seemed to hold its breath. Coyotes howled far off, but beneath their cries was that same heavy rhythm, paws against soil circling the wire. No one slept easily. Some prayed. Others lay rigid, pretending not to notice the way their hearts beat faster whenever the sound drew near. The guards never acknowledged it. By dawn, the mystery had become legend. Men traded stories about massive shadows, glinting eyes, and beasts that could smell fear through the fence. The imagination of the defeated filled in every gap. Yet for Becker, the fear felt different. It wasn't the dread of attack. It was the dread of recognition. He knew that control, that poise. Whoever trained those dogs had mastered something rare. The Americans walked their rounds as usual, unfazed. They neither confirmed nor denied anything. The silence itself became the message. You are watched, but not hunted. Guarded, but not hated. In the stillness before sleep, Becker thought of Germany, of kennels. Commands barked harshly, obedience beaten into muscle. These sounds beyond the wire held none of that cruelty, only purpose. Somewhere outside, the unseen animal exhaled softly, almost like a sigh. Becker closed his eyes and listened, not with fear, but with a strange, growing respect. Whatever waited beyond that fence wasn't an enemy. The sun hung low over Camp Bowie, a molten disk sinking into the Texas horizon. Shadows stretched long across the parade ground when the first patrol appeared, 2 MPs and something beside them. The Germans paused mid-step, conversation dying in their throats. From behind the soldiers strode 2 massive figures, black and tan, muscles rippling under glossy coats, their movements synchronized, fluid, deliberate. Rottweilers. For a moment, no one breathed. The prisoners stared as if time had stopped. They knew those shapes, those deep chests and square jaws, the pride of German breeding now leashed by the enemy. Becker felt his stomach twist. The irony struck deep, a wound hidden under disbelief. German dogs guarding German men under foreign command. "They're ours," someone whispered bitterly. "They've even captured our dogs." The handlers called them by English names, Rex and Duke. Voices calm, steady. The dogs obeyed instantly, never growling, never barking. Their silence carried more authority than a shout ever could. The Americans passed without acknowledging the prisoners' stares. One guard scratched his dog's ear casually, the way a man might greet an old friend. The gesture seemed almost tender, infuriatingly human. Becker couldn't look away. The animals' discipline was flawless, their posture proud, yet relaxed. He recognized training born not of fear, but trust. It contradicted everything he'd been taught about control. That night, the camp buzzed. Some men were furious. "They use our own creations against us," one spat. Shameful. Others remained quiet, their anger curdled into uneasy fascination. The guards never used the dogs to intimidate. They didn't need to. Just their presence was enough. A living reminder that authority could exist without cruelty and power without brutality. At roll call the next morning, Becker caught the gaze of one Rottweiler as it passed. Its amber eyes were steady, curious. In that silent exchange, Becker felt both recognition and loss. Later, assigned to a fence repair crew, he found himself near a patrol route. The same dog, Rex, he thought, walked past, head level, pace exact. The handler gave him a nod. Becker tensed, expecting dominance, but the gesture was polite. The American's hand rested lightly on the dog's back, not to restrain, but to reassure. That detail unsettled Becker more than any threat. When the pair disappeared into sunlight, Becker's workmate whispered, "Did you see that? They treat them like soldiers." Becker said nothing, his thoughts tangled between admiration and humiliation. That evening, from the barracks window, he watched another patrol. The Rottweilers moved like shadows come alive, calm, confident, utterly in control. The guards trusted them completely. It was harmony, not command. Men gathered at the wire, whispering. "They've made them soft," one muttered. Another shook his head. "No, they've made them better." Becker said nothing. Deep down, he knew which was true. As darkness fell, the memory replayed in his mind. The soft pat of the handler's hand, the dog's quiet obedience. Control without violence, strength without cruelty. It was a revelation too heavy to dismiss. Beyond the fence, the Rottweilers paced their silent circuits under a moon pale as steel. Each step echoed with a truth Becker could no longer deny. Even their dogs had learned a gentler kind of power. The days after the Rottweiler's first appearance changed everything. The prisoners no longer saw the camp merely as confinement. It became a mirror. The dogs walked its edge like living symbols of quiet power. Becker found himself watching the handlers more than the animals. The Americans spoke softly, using short, clear commands. No shouting, no whips, no threats. The dogs responded instantly, almost joyfully, as if obedience was a privilege. He remembered training dogs in Germany. Harsh tones, rigid drills, the ever-present fear of failure. There, discipline had meant dominance. Here, it meant respect. That difference gnawed at him like a question he couldn't answer. One morning, during a work detail near the motor depot, Becker's team hauled lumber under the blazing sun. An MP approached with his Rottweiler, the animal's black coat shimmering like oil. The guard's name tag read, Sanders. He stopped beside the men, wiping sweat from his brow. "Hot one today," he said in slow English, smiling faintly. The dog sat beside him, alert but calm. Becker nodded cautiously, unsure whether to reply. Sanders rested his hand on the dog's shoulder. The animal leaned slightly into the touch, a gesture of trust so effortless it startled Becker more than any command could. When Sanders left, Becker's partner exhaled. "Did you see that? The beast would die for him." Becker stared after them, silent. It wasn't obedience born of fear. It was loyalty earned. That night, he wrote in his small notebook, "Strength is not what forces obedience. Strength is what earns it." The words felt dangerous, almost treasonous, yet impossibly true. As days passed, more prisoners noticed. The dogs never barked without reason. They patrolled like clockwork, sharp yet serene. Even men who hated the sight of them couldn't deny their discipline commanded respect. Rumors spread again, stories of how the Americans trained their animals. "They feed them steak," one man sneered. "They treat them better than us." But his bitterness couldn't hide the flicker of admiration in his tone. Becker's fascination deepened when he saw a handler reward his dog with a biscuit after a flawless patrol. No shouting, no ceremony, just a pat, a word, and trust renewed. He began to wonder if this was the Americans' secret weapon, not weapons or wealth, but their uncanny ability to make control look like cooperation. Power without cruelty. Order without fear. When a young prisoner tripped during a drill, dropping a tool near a dog, the animal didn't react. It simply stood firm, eyes steady. Becker watched, amazed. In Germany, that moment would have ended in blood. Even the guards' demeanor reflected the same principle. They joked among themselves, confident yet never careless. Their authority came not from volume, but certainty, a quiet assurance that echoed through everything they commanded. For Becker, the realization was both humbling and liberating. The empire he'd served had confused fear with strength. These Americans, his captors, seemed to understand that real power required neither hatred nor pride. At sunset, he lingered by the fence, watching a patrol vanish into gold and shadow. The dogs moved in rhythm, as if bound not by chains but understanding. Becker envied them and what they represented. That night, as wind rustled through the mesquite trees, he whispered to himself in German, "So this is how they win." The words were not accusation, but revelation, the kind that lingers long after silence falls. The summer heat in Texas pressed down like a living thing. Dust clung to sweat and tempers simmered quietly beneath the calm routine. Even in captivity, frustration found its way through cracks of discipline. One afternoon during supply unloading, a young prisoner snapped. Barely 19, he dropped his crate, muttered curses, then bolted toward the perimeter. The world seemed to freeze, every head turning toward the fence. A sharp whistle cut through the air. From the edge of the compound, a Rottweiler lunged forward, chains rattling once, then going still. The animal stopped inches from the fleeing boy, blocking his path. No barking, no snapping jaws, just that immovable presence. The dog's chest heaved, eyes locked, silent as stone. The prisoner collapsed to his knees, trembling, the madness of escape gone in an instant. Guards rushed forward, shouting orders. The handler approached calmly, voice low, soothing the animal rather than restraining it. The Rottweiler's body relaxed almost immediately. It had done its job, without violence. The Americans praised the dog with one word: good. No treats, no fanfare. Just quiet approval. Becker watched the scene unfold, heart pounding, his mind spinning faster than his breath. That night, the story spread through every barrack. The boy was unharmed. The dog hadn't bitten, hadn't even growled. Some called it luck. Others whispered it was something more, control unlike anything they'd ever seen. Becker couldn't stop replaying the moment. The strength wasn't in aggression. It was in restraint. The dog could have torn the boy apart, yet it chose discipline over instinct. That choice felt human. He remembered his own training years ago, when trainers beat obedience into animals until submission replaced thought. This, what he saw today, was mastery built on understanding, not dominance. The next morning, Becker saw the handler brushing the same dog under a shade tent. The Rottweiler leaned into him like an old friend. The guard murmured softly, "Brave boy, not cruel." The phrase echoed in Becker's head all day. Not cruel. Could that be true of power itself? Could strength exist without the poison of fear? The thought unsettled and inspired him both. Even the guards seemed changed after that event. They carried themselves with quiet pride, their respect for the animal obvious. The dog had become more than a guard. It was a living lesson. Days later, Becker wrote another note in his journal. To rule with fear is easy. To rule with mercy takes courage. He didn't know whether he was writing about men or dogs. Conversations shifted among the prisoners. They began speaking less of escape and more of home. What might change if the world learned to command with kindness instead of cruelty? For Becker, each patrol of those dogs marked time like a heartbeat. Their footsteps at night no longer sounded menacing but protective, as if reminding the camp that peace was possible even here. He wondered if the Americans knew the effect their discipline had. Perhaps they didn't care. Perhaps that was the secret. Mercy given without expectation was stronger than any punishment. When the lights went out that night, Becker lay awake. The image of that Rottweiler standing firm at the fence burned into his thoughts. He finally understood. Restraint wasn't weakness. It was the highest form of control. By autumn, the rhythm of captivity had softened into something dangerously close to comfort. The days blurred together under the Texas sun, routine, predictable, almost peaceful. War felt like another lifetime. Becker woke each morning to the sound of bugles, not bombs. The smell of coffee replaced smoke. Even the guards' voices had lost their edge, their orders spoken more like reminders than threats. The prisoners worked fields, repaired fences, helped locals rebuild barns destroyed by storms. American farmers nodded politely, sometimes offering cold water, their friendliness as strange to the Germans as the vastness of the sky. Becker noticed laughter returning, quiet at first, then freer. The men had stopped expecting cruelty. They still longed for home, but dread no longer clung to every sunrise. Evenings brought conversation instead of despair. Men traded cigarettes for stories, letters for news. Some began learning English from newspapers. Becker practiced phrases at night, repeating them softly into the darkness. The guards, too, had changed. They no longer watched with suspicion, but familiarity. Some even joked with the prisoners, sharing small talk about weather, baseball, or the food served in the mess hall. It wasn't friendship, not exactly, but something adjacent, mutual recognition that humanity had survived the war, at least within these fences. It was both comforting and unsettling in equal measure. The Rottweilers remained constant, their presence woven into the fabric of camp life. Each patrol traced invisible lines between freedom and captivity, but somehow they made that boundary feel safe, not cruel. Becker often sat near the fence watching them move. Their composure fascinated him. Even the dogs seemed content, their eyes calm, their bodies relaxed, their discipline unbroken, but unforced. He began sketching them in his notebook, powerful forms rendered in charcoal, shadows and motion captured on paper. It became his quiet ritual, a way to understand what words couldn't. One afternoon, while Becker worked near the motor pool, a guard approached. Corporal Miller, young, broad-shouldered, with a Rottweiler named Bruno. "You draw?" he asked, gesturing toward the notebook. Becker hesitated, then nodded. Miller smiled. "He'd pose if he knew," he said, patting the dog's head. Bruno wagged his tail once, a single, deliberate gesture of easy trust. Something shifted in that small moment. The line between captor and captive blurred. Miller's kindness felt uncalculated, natural. Becker wasn't sure whether to feel grateful or ashamed for appreciating it. At night, the camp glowed softly with lanterns. Music drifted from the mess hall, harmonicas, sometimes an old phonograph playing scratchy jazz. For the first time, silence wasn't filled with fear, but rest. Some men still resisted the peace, claiming it was a trick, a test of loyalty. Becker disagreed quietly. If mercy was a weapon, then it was the gentlest one he'd ever known. As the Rottweilers paced the perimeter under moonlight, their silhouettes looked almost noble, guardians rather than oppressors. Becker wondered if they even understood which side of the fence they walked for. He fell asleep that night to the rhythm of paws in dust, thinking that captivity, when shaped by kindness, didn't always feel like punishment. Sometimes it felt like learning to breathe again. December arrived quietly, the Texas wind turning sharp and dry. The days shortened, and the evenings carried a strange tenderness. Something close to nostalgia, something neither prisoners nor guards dared to name aloud. Rumors spread that the Americans planned something special for Christmas Eve. The Germans laughed bitterly at first. "A feast in captivity?" someone muttered. "Will they gift us our freedom next?" But the whispers persisted. Becker felt the mood shifting as decorations appeared near the mess hall, a small pine tree, a few paper stars, bits of tinsel cut from supply wrappers. It looked fragile, almost childlike, yet strangely sincere. That evening, the guards invited the prisoners to gather near the yard. Lanterns cast soft light over the dust, and the air hummed with quiet anticipation. The Rottweilers sat beside their handlers, calm as ever. A chaplain spoke in halting German, his words simple: peace, forgiveness, survival. No politics, no sermon of victory, just humanity shared between men who'd once aimed rifles at each other. Then the singing began. The German prisoners started softly, hesitant, their voices low and trembling. Stille Nacht drifted into the cool air, and one by one the Americans joined in. The sound grew, tentative harmony across languages, across wounds. Even the dogs seemed to still, their ears twitching as if they understood that something rare was unfolding beyond command or reason. Becker sang with a lump in his throat, his voice merging with men he'd once called enemies. The words of peace, spoken in captivity, felt heavier and truer than any he'd sung before. When the final note faded, silence followed. Profound, weighty, sacred. For a brief, impossible moment, war seemed like a distant memory, something fading beyond the edges of lantern light. Miller approached afterward, carrying a small package wrapped in paper. "From the Red Cross," he said, offering it to Becker. Inside lay a piece of chocolate stamped with an American eagle. Becker hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Danke," he murmured. Miller grinned. "Merry Christmas, pal." Behind him, Bruno wagged his tail once, approving of the strange exchange between two soldiers divided by circumstance. That night, the barracks felt different. Men shared what little they had: tobacco, bread, even jokes. The guards lingered nearby, unarmed, listening to laughter that sounded new, uncertain, but real. Becker couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the rafters, hearing rain patter against tin. Beyond the fence, a Rottweiler barked once, then settled, as if keeping watch over the fragile peace. He thought of Munich, of home reduced to rubble, of his mother writing letters by candlelight. He realized with quiet guilt that he was safer here than she was in her own city. The thought hollowed him, yet it also comforted. Perhaps kindness had found a stronger foothold here than anywhere he'd left behind. Perhaps mercy could bloom even in the shadow of defeat. As dawn broke on Christmas morning, frost dusted the ground, turning the barbed wire silver. Becker stepped outside, his breath fogging the air, and whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what victory truly looks like." Behind him, a Rottweiler stretched, yawned, and looked up at the sunrise, its breath rising like smoke, its calm unbroken. In that quiet moment, both man and beast stood guard over a world trying to heal. By early spring, a hush fell over Camp Bowie. The war in Europe was crumbling. Rumors of Germany's collapse traveled faster than mail, carried on the nervous whispers of restless men. The Americans didn't hide the news. Newspapers appeared in the canteen, headlines bold and unflinching. Berlin bombed. Reich retreats. Allies advance. Each word carved deeper into the prisoner's sense of inevitability. Becker read them quietly, hands trembling. Defeat was no longer theoretical. It was happening in real time. The empire he had once served was dissolving into ink, ash, and memory. The guard spoke gently now, aware of the tension. Work assignments continued, but the air felt different, looser, almost fragile. Even the Rottweilers seemed to sense the change, their patrols slower, less vigilant. One morning, a sergeant announced that some prisoners might soon be released. The words rippled through the camp like electricity. Home. The idea thrilled and terrified them in equal measure. Home to what? Becker wondered. The Germany he knew was gone. Letters spoke of rubble, hunger, families scattered. Returning felt less like freedom and more like stepping into the ruins of a dream. Still, hope began to bloom again, uneasy but alive. The prisoners worked with renewed focus, mending fences, cleaning the yard, even helping dismantle old guard posts. It felt symbolic, like preparing to bury the war itself. Miller often spoke with Becker during these days. "Won't be long now," he'd say, scratching Bruno's ear. "You'll be free soon." Becker nodded, though part of him already felt free inside the wire. One afternoon, Miller told him he planned to take Bruno home after discharge. "He's earned it," he said proudly. Becker smiled faintly. "So have you." For once, both men understood each other completely. The news of Germany's surrender came without fanfare. A corporal read it aloud near the flagpole, his voice steady. The camp fell silent. No cheers, no tears, just stillness, as if the world had stopped breathing. Becker sat on the barrack steps, eyes unfocused. The words, "Germany has surrendered," echoed in his skull, hollow and final. Around him, men stared at nothing, lost in their private reckonings. Miller found him later, setting down a tin mug of coffee. "Guess that's that," he said softly. Becker looked up, weary but calm. "No," he murmured. "Now it begins." In the days that followed, prisoners helped dismantle the fences that once held them. Each post pulled from the ground felt like pulling up a piece of the past. Even the dogs watched quietly, tails still. Becker crossed the perimeter for the first time without a guard. The open air smelled different, freer, heavier. He realized he'd grown used to boundaries, to order. Freedom, he thought, required its own kind of courage. When the trucks arrived to take them away, Miller stood by the gate with Bruno at his side. "Safe travels, Becker," he said. Becker shook his hand firmly. "Take care of him," he replied. Miller smiled. "Don't worry. He's family now." The dog sat calmly, watching the exchange, head tilted as if understanding the weight of goodbye. Becker's throat tightened, words caught behind gratitude. As the truck pulled away, Becker looked back one last time. The camp shrank behind him. Rows of white barracks, the fading flag, and a Rottweiler standing sentinel in the morning light. He realized then that the war hadn't ended in Berlin or on battlefields. It ended here, in Texas, where mercy had worn a uniform, and a German dog had learned to guard peace instead of fear. Months after the surrender, Becker stepped off a train into a shattered Munich. Smoke still curled from the ruins, the air thick with ash and the bitter smell of loss. Germany had become a ghost. Streets once full of marching boots now echoed with silence. Families scavenged through rubble. Hunger lingered like fog. Becker walked slowly, unsure whether he had returned home or to the grave of what once was. He carried little, A tattered uniform, a notebook, a handful of letters from Camp Bowie. The memories weighed more than the belongings. He had left captivity, but captivity hadn't left him. Everywhere he saw reminders of the Reich's collapse, banners torn, symbols defaced, eyes hollowed by shame. Yet in that desolation, he also sensed the faint pulse of survival, stubborn and fragile as spring grass. Weeks passed. Becker found a small room in a half-burned building near the old market square. Each night he lay awake, remembering the quiet discipline of the Americans, their dogs pacing under the Texas moon. One afternoon, while walking through the ruins of a butcher's shop, he heard a sound, soft, high-pitched, trembling. Beneath a broken counter, a Rottweiler pup whimpered, its ribs showing beneath dirty fur. Becker knelt, hands shaking. The pup stared up at him, unafraid. He lifted it gently, brushing dust from its coat. The dog licked his wrist once, instinctively trusting. "You'll do better," he whispered. He named it Arlo. Each day he fed it scraps, trained it patiently, never shouting, never striking. He remembered the Americans' quiet authority, their calm commands, and mirrored their method with reverent precision. Neighbors teased him, saying he spoiled the dog. Becker only smiled. "He's learning to trust," he'd reply softly. "So am I." The animal became his shadow, loyal without fear, strong without hardness. As months turned into years, Becker began rebuilding more than a life. He helped repair streets, taught children to read, even offered to train dogs for local families, using what he called the American way. He showed them how tone mattered more than volume, patience more than punishment. "A dog follows your heart, not your hand," he'd tell them. People listened because his calm carried conviction. Sometimes, late at night, he'd sit by the fire, Arlo's head resting on his knee. The memories of Camp Bowie would return, the smell of mesquite, the sight of Rottweilers walking under a foreign flag. He no longer felt humiliation, only gratitude. Those dogs had taught him what war never could, that control built on respect endures longer than control built on fear. He had seen mercy win. When historians later interviewed him, Becker described Camp Bowie as the strangest kind of victory. His voice trembled as he said, "They conquered us with decency. They reminded us how to be human again." Arlo grew old beside him, faithful until the end. When the dog passed, Becker buried him beneath an oak tree, whispering the same words he once wrote in captivity. "Strength is what earns obedience." Years later, he adopted another pup, black and tan, broad-shouldered like the Texas dogs. When it followed him through the ruined streets, people smiled, seeing hope walk beside the ghosts of war. Becker died quietly in his sleep decades later, a notebook still on his bedside table. Its final line read simply, "Mercy, once learned, never dies. It guards the soul as the dog guards the gate."